Hey, hey. This is going to be a continuation of our Unit 8 content on motivation, particularly with regard to achievement motivation and how much of that can also apply to our work motivation, whether that be at our occupation, our school, anything along those lines. So let's get down to it. If you go from Floyd's perspective, motivation where work is concerned is connected to a healthy life. He very much was under the belief that one fulfills a really strong purpose if their life is full of love and work. That ultimately they're doing something that they feel is of benefit, and so that makes them happy. But the unfortunate reality is that there are many people who end up having jobs that just don't necessarily fulfill them or make them happy. And that can kind of lend itself towards attitudes that people hold toward work. Some consider a task to simply just be a job. It's a necessary way for you to make money. For many of you, what you hold right now as high school students and with your after-school jobs, they are jobs to you. They don't necessarily have anything to do with a possible career that you're moving toward, but they're your way of earning a living, earning some money to offset car insurance, to be able to go out and do fun things with your friends, stuff like that. For others, work is a career, so you implement a certain amount of work in order to advance from one position to another. So you work very hard to earn things like promotions or acknowledgments or things along those lines, and to just kind of move up that ladder, so to speak. For others, their work is a calling. So to them, they perceive that they're fulfilling some kind of socially useful activity. And while you might not believe it, given some of your interactions with teachers, including myself, many who come into the education profession, to them, their job is a calling. They really do feel that what they're completing with the work that they do is something that is societally useful, that we are attempting to provide you with knowledge, whatever that knowledge happens to be, to make you productive citizens, to go forth into the real world and continue our society in a means of forward progress. Now, when we talk about the issue of how oftentimes work can lend itself toward being immersed in something, because the reality is for some of us, certain pieces of work flow very easily. They are intrinsically rewarding in the sense that they make us feel personally happy. Okay, they give us just internal joy. And a lot of times that gets marked by something that we call flow. So when you find yourself becoming so involved and focused on a work that you are completing that you just completely lose track of time, then in that sense, you're developing flow. So it's not often for me, or it is often for me, I should say. That didn't sound very good. It's pretty often for me to see this happen when I'm at home and I'm attempting to move through a unit and getting it prepared for presenting it to you guys. I'll go through prior years worth of content and I start maneuvering through things and seeing what did I think worked, what needs to be changed and stuff like that. And by the time I get done with that, the next thing I know, I've completed everything that I wanted to and I've completely lost track of time, and I just got so immersed in doing that task, I totally forgot about other factors. People who have flow in their work, like artists, dancers, composers, people who are doing things that are intrinsically motivating, they're driven less by extrinsic reward. So that's oftentimes why many of you don't necessarily demonstrate flow where your homework is concerned. Think about how many times you've had to get started on your vocab, for me, for example, and you cannot find the effort and the energy to get started on it. And so it's like start, stop, start, stop, start, stop. If that's the case, it's because you're doing that work only for its extrinsic reward, okay? Whether it be, like the points that are attached to it, or because we say that you're supposed to do those things. If you're doing the vocab, though, and all of this content because you genuinely find it interesting, you're fascinated by how the mind works, you think that so much of this content that we've talked about is just so cool in the fact that it connects to your real life, you're going to be exponentially more likely to develop flow when it comes to your work for this course. So that's something to consider not only just for here, but any subject you find interest in. If you're really big into science, then you'll probably have flow in those courses. If you're not so big into math, you're not going to have flow where that's concerned. Industrial and organizational psychologists are people within the field of the study of mind and thought processes, or the brain and thought processes, that really attempt to use psychology that they know and principles they know in the workplace to help ensure that there's lots of flow, that there is intrinsic motivation there, okay? So they're going to work to try to make workplaces better. There are two different avenues that you can go down with this, and I know students who are interested in going into IO psychology as an actual major and future occupation. There's personnel psychology, so you would do a little bit more in terms of human resource style stuff, where you look at the principles of selecting and evaluating workers. If you go toward the organizational route, then what you're going to do is see how certain work environments and management styles end up impacting things like how motivated workers are to, earn commission, how satisfied they are in their job, and how that impacts their performance later on. We know from a ton of research by IO Psychs, for example, the more happy you are with your job and the more valued you feel, the more productive you end up being. So all of those connect back to IO Psychs, which ultimately connects to the issue of achievement motivation, okay? We would define achievement motivation by a learned characteristic you demonstrate where you feel satisfaction for striving and attaining excellence. So you as AP students, as you stay in my class and in any of your AP courses, one would assume you have achievement motivation because AP classes are challenging. They're designed to be that way. Okay, so ultimately the reason why you're taking it is because you feel satisfaction in being able to say, look, I am an AP student. I have worked my tail off for a particular score on that AP exam, and here are the results that prove that my level of excellence is present. Okay, so interestingly enough, B.F. Skinner would be a wonderful example of achievement motivation in the sense that he worked tirelessly almost to develop an incredibly disciplined structure for himself to become one of the foremost psychological minds of the 20th century. So when we talk about this issue of achievement motivation, it's important to recognize that there are differing levels of it, because the reality is there are people with low achievement motivation, just as there are people with high achievement motivation. So what differentiates them? If you are highly achievement motivated, that means you are going to choose challenging tasks, but ones that are possibly capable of being completed and completed successfully, okay? So you're not going to do something that's insanely difficult because it's not realistic for you to achieve it, okay? So you're not going to start trying to go solve, quantum physics laws and theories and stuff like that. Likewise, you're not going to do things that are super easy tasks, because then anybody can do them. So the success that you would have in those tasks is not minimal. It's just not there. It's minimal. Okay, like you're not going to feel very proud of yourself because you're going to be sitting there saying, well, everybody else can do that. That doesn't make me feel very successful. So ultimately then what they're going to do is they're going to pick something that is realistically challenging for them. Okay? Now, on the flip side of this, if you have low achievement motivation, that means you're motivated not necessarily by a desire to truly be successful at something that could challenge you and to stretch you. You're motivated by a desire to avoid failure. It's a very big difference, because if you look at somebody who has a low achievement motivation, they're going to pick something that's super easy or insanely difficult. So they're virtually the exact opposite of someone with high achievement motivation. And if you think of the logic behind this, it makes sense. If your fear is failure, if that's your motivation, that you do not want to fail at something, you're going to do stuff that is incredibly easy because anyone else can do it, so you'll be just right with the pack. Or you're going to do something that is insanely difficult. Why? Because virtually no one else is going to be able to do it either. So again, you're still with the pack. People with low achievement motivation will not do moderately challenging tasks, because if they try to work on them and they try to do them and they fail, then they are failures. So that thing they're trying to avoid has occurred. Okay, so they're not going to do something that could challenge them. Now, How do you measure achievement motivation? Dave McClelland ended up doing something with thematic apperception test. You'll hear me talk about McClelland later on when we hit some of our later units. But the thematic apperception test is when people are shown ambiguous pictures and told to write a story about what's happening in the picture. Ultimately, they established a standard score to this test, and they used that to determine the amount of ultimately your score for achievement motivation. And so they ended up, let me move my video down here a little bit, or up, I guess I should say, so that way you can see those words a little bit easier. And so what they end up doing is your score is called your, your numeric value of achievement or need for achievement, which is NACH. Okay? And so then that score would either be low or high, depending on the story that you told within that thematic apperception test. Keep in mind that the TAT is also going to come back when we start learning about psychoanalysis and psychodynamicism with personality. So when do you learn achievement motivation? And for that matter, I mean, a big question would be this too. Is it learned? Could you be born with certain aspects of achievement motivation? Kind of connecting back to that nature versus nurture piece. We do know that there is an aspect of achievement motivation that is, in fact, learned, okay? You're going to learn it in early childhood predominantly, especially from your parents. There's a lot of research out there that supports that. Particularly, kids that have high achievement motivation, their motivation stems from parents that will encourage their kids to try difficult things, especially new ones. Okay, so if they encourage their kids to do something different, regardless of whether they fail or not, those kids do tend to have higher achievement motivation when they're older, rather than the kids who are not encouraged to do that and who are encouraged to essentially just kind of stay within their box and do just the same things over and over. Parents that give their children praise and rewards for success, not just for trying something, but for truly succeeding at it, for demonstrating an aspect of hard work and grit. You've heard me talk about that issue of grit many times before, and perseverance with this class in particular, right? It's very difficult. It's very challenging. There's tons of work that corresponds to it. But so many of my students that grit it out and persevere and work their tails off for me, rarely, if ever, do they end up regretting that work. I mean, anything that I've ever worked hard for, when I look back and I think over it, I never sit there and say to myself, I regret putting that level of effort into what I did, especially if it resulted in success for me. So parents that give praise for true success, not just trying something, those kids end up having higher achievement motivation. When parents encourage their kids to find ways to succeed rather than just complaining and saying, well, like, I just can't do this. Okay, so in a sense, demonstrating some learned helplessness, that you have no control over a situation, and so therefore you cannot possibly be successful at it. Parents who don't let their kid make excuses for things or who try to find other ways to succeed, they are more likely to have children who learn high achievement motivation later on. And then finally, parents that end up encouraging their kids to move on to the next kind of level of difficulty or the next push, the next challenge, those kids also end up having high achievement motivation as well. Some cultural factors are also at play as well, because if you think about it, parents who encourage those things in their kids probably are encouraging those things because they themselves were encouraged by those pieces from their parents, and so ultimately that demonstrates an aspect of the impact of culture. If a society deems achievement to be something of significance and that motivation is something to be significant, then those lessons are going to be learned. Look at tons of children's books like Dr. Seuss with Oh, the Places You'll Go. I got that for my high school graduation. It was a present that one of my family members gave me. But I mean, it's a children's book. Dr. Seuss is a children's author. Same thing for The Little Engine That Could. I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. Pushing yourself and persevering and trying your hardest. If those are encoded into children's stories, those kids are going to take that piece of information in and acquire it into their own behaviors themselves. How much a culture values achievement, as I said earlier. Does the United States push achievement? In many respects, we do. If you look back to the whole mentality of our country from its very beginnings, there's very much this mentality of you are in charge of your fate. You pull yourself up by your own bootstraps and you work hard to get whatever it is that you want. That's ultimately the entire factor behind that whole idea of the American dream, of getting what you want, that you have to work hard and achieve and push yourself to do those things. So what kind of things motivate us? You've heard me make mention of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation here in this lecture a little earlier. So let's talk about how we define them then. When we're talking something that is intrinsically motivating, this is when we're going to do something because we enjoy it and it provides us with personal satisfaction. Okay? And here's the thing, if something is intrinsically motivating to you, you are exponentially more likely to work harder for that and to persevere and to produce higher quality work if something is intrinsically motivating for you. I'll come back to this in a second because a lot of this can come back to your homework as well and how you are with me in this class. Extrinsic motivation, on the other hand, is when you do something. I'm going to pull myself up here a little bit further, okay? It's when you do something because you want a concrete reward, okay? Please note I said reward, not award. We've had this conversation before. An award can be a reward, but not every reward is an award. There's some fun syntax and grammar structures for you. If you're motivated by doing something for, say, like points or for a grade or things like that, it's going to undermine your performance because you're not going to give your best quality work. So let's use some scenarios of how this could be applicable to students in school, okay? So I'm going to bring this down for myself. Let's say you are intrinsically motivated because you truly believe that your education is important. It is going to be your gateway into improving your life and making sure that you achieve that American dream, okay? But not only that, you want to do something with your life that you know is going to make you happy. That's an example of intrinsic motivation. That's me as an example. Pretty much anybody knows that if you're going into the education profession, you ain't doing it for the money. You're doing it because you love to learn. You love to interact with children. You love to feel that, you feel that sense of personal satisfaction when a kid has that kind of light bulb, aha, insight moment of, oh my God, I get this. That in and of itself is the most rewarding component of our job as educators. Trust me, it's not the money, that extrinsic reward that motivates us to want to do our job. It's the fact that we find our occupation to be a calling and to be something that's intrinsically motivating for us. You demonstrate intrinsic motivation with the subjects that you like. Think about it. If you're just taking my class because you know that it's a general ed requirement at your college that you intend to go to and you're just doing it to get it out of the way, well, that's an extrinsic motivator. Okay, that's a tangible reward of earning your 3 on the exam so that way you can avoid paying for for those credits, so you save yourself some money. So it's not intrinsically rewarding then. So if that's the case, that's why you struggle to do all of your work and to stay on top of it and to be motivated to complete what I ask you to complete, because you are only motivated by those rewards of the points or the grade. Okay, now if something is intrinsically motivating for you in terms of your learning, you're doing it because you genuinely want to know about it. So there are kids, believe it or not, in my course who they do every piece of their work for me, every note section, every reading guide section, every vocab term and then some. They will do all of the organization review guides. They will be there to do every in-class activity that I ask them to complete. They're doing it because they love psychology. They're doing it because they find it fascinating and interesting, and it's personally satisfying to them to understand those things. So what you have to ask yourself is, which one are you where this course is concerned? Does that mean you're not going to be successful in here if all you're motivated for is, say, the grade, for example? No, that's not true. There's plenty of kids who've been motivated by earning just an A and just getting this course out of the way, and they were plenty successful and were able to earn a 5 on the AP exam. What I'm simply saying to you is this. If all your motivation is a grade, then what you're learning here holds no significance. So to kind of bring this back to earlier units we've covered, the information isn't going to be as likely to stick. The work won't be as high quality, and you're going to be more likely to forget stuff. So there's that piece. Now, it is important to recognize that intrinsic and extrinsic motivation can interplay with one another. And we see this in the issue of something called the over-justification effect. I'm going to warn you, what Lepper, Green, and Nisbet studied with this whole thing is a very abstract concept. It seems to run completely counterintuitive to what we would believe. But I'm going to prove to you that many of you actually operate on the offer justification effect. And we're going to do some in-class activities to try to make sure that you can understand this concept a little bit better because it is kind of abstract. So if you look at Lepper, Green, and Nisbet's study that they completed, and ultimately the theory they established was this over-justification. They had an experiment that they set up where in their first group, this was what they called the expected award group. Okay, so these were kids that were told they would receive a certificate, okay, that had a seal and a ribbon, okay, for participating in the activity that they were doing for purely intrinsic reasons, okay? So what happened was kids who were doing a task like, say, reading because they loved to read, they got a reward for it. They got this certificate with a seal and a ribbon saying like, hey, you are amazing and you are wonderful because you wanted to read just for the fun of it. In the second condition, okay, the second group, they were what they called the unexpected award condition. So these kids were not told of any reward that would go to an intrinsically motivating activity. So this was the control group, and the first group was the experimental group. They were the ones being manipulated, okay? Or excuse me, the first two conditions were the experimental group, and then this third group was the control group, okay? So this group didn't get anything, okay? There was no reward that ever came, unexpectedly versus, continuously, or having any, previous warning or anything along those lines. So they were the control, okay? Now, one would think that receiving a reward, so one of these guys, particularly one if you knew it was coming, would motivate you to read more, especially considering it was already intrinsically motivating. If you read for the sake of reading because you enjoyed it and it was personally satisfying to you, one would think tapping on a reward to it would magically make you more motivated to complete it. That's not what happened, though. And that's the surprising component to this. The researchers let those kids go about their activities, okay? Kids that thought that they were getting a reward for this intrinsically motivating activity, they first got it. Then as they continued the activity over and over and they no longer got their reward, they stopped trying. Sorry, that was my radiator. It picked up on my movement in my classroom. So, let me say this again, okay, just to reinforce this. The kids that had been told, I'm going to get a reward for doing this reading, they got their reward, but then they no longer received it. The intrinsic value of reading dropped. They were no longer motivated to read because they loved to read. Because they were no longer getting that extrinsic value there to it. They weren't getting that incentive. It made their intrinsic motivation tank. This ultimately, if you think about it, explains why some kids who used to be really highly motivated where school is concerned, okay, they actually enjoyed learning for the sake of learning, stop caring about completing their schoolwork. Because what do you get when you do your schoolwork? You get points, you get grades. So it lost its intrinsic value because of that extrinsic piece, and it caused the over-justification effect. Okay, we'll do a couple more in-class activities with that to help you guys better understand it, because it is kind of strange and hard to follow. All right, so let's finish talking about all of this with motivational conflict. The reality is this: some things that drive us or motivate us or compel us to do certain things, oftentimes the motives behind those can come into conflict with one another. Sometimes we have to do things we don't want to do, and we have to choose between two pretty unpleasant options. Sometimes we have to choose between two really pleasant options, and it's hard because they're both pleasant and we want both of them to happen. So let's talk approach, avoidance, approach, and multiple approach avoidance, right? So approach conflict is when you have two equally attractive options. As the importance of that choice for you within this scenario of, say, going on a date with this person you've got a crush on, and going to a friend's party, as the importance increases for you, so does the difficulty in making your decision. So let's say your friend desperately wants you at their birthday party, but you really, really want to go out on this date with this new person because you're crushing on them real bad. Okay? So, as the level of significance matters, if you don't think that your friend's party is going to be really all that exciting, well, it might be fun, it's not going to be an absolute blast. Obviously, then it would make the decision you'd have to make within this scenario pretty simple. So as that choice significance increases for you, the higher the difficulty for the situation in determining what you want to do as well. Avoidance is kind of the opposite, in that it involves you having to choose between two very unattractive options. For example, vacuuming the house or shoveling snow. Neither one of them are pleasant or ways that you would really want to spend your free time. And so these tend to be really hard for us to end up resolving just because it can create intense emotions, because we tend to be very swayed by negative emotion in particular. We kind of talked about that with our dream content. Why is it that people are far more likely to remember negative dreams than they are positive ones, for example? Other possible scenarios of avoidance conflict. Having to choose between declaring bankruptcy or selling the family home you've lived in for decades. Okay, that would absolutely carry with it a pretty intense level of emotional response. Approach avoidance is what you would kind of, determine to be a pro and con style scenario. So having to make the decision between going to a dream concert with a band, for a band that you've just been absolutely obsessed with for a while, but you have to go with the annoying friend. So you have to, on the plus side of things, you're going to get to go see this band and you've wanted to see them for a while. But on the bottom end of it, you're going to have to be with this friend, and spending more than 2 minutes with them really makes you want to pull your hair out. Okay? These are hard to resolve because they end up resolving themselves after a long period of indecision. Okay? It's just really hard for people to decide what end of that spectrum ends up winning out for you to make the decision. Then you have the issue of multiple approach avoidance. So I'm going to pull this up here so you can see all of this. This is when you have to choose between multiple attractive and negative aspects within one scenario. Okay, so looking at your various different options for college. Seniors, you've probably have to present yourself with this now that you're starting to put applications in, and the deadline for December 1st has very quickly come around. You've got to look at the pros and the cons for each one of these places. Okay, so UC versus Xavier versus Ohio State. 2 are public, 1 is private. 2 are very large colleges, 1 is small. So do you want, maybe you like the idea of having anonymity and being one of the many, so that's awesome. But if you went to Ohio State, you'd have to pay room and board, which is going to make it pretty pricey because you don't live in Columbus. Okay? Maybe you like the idea of having smaller class sizes, so Xavier sounds better for you. Here's the problem. Xavier's a private institution, so it's going to cost more in terms of your tuition. Okay? These end up being really difficult to resolve because it's hard to compare each feature and each option when you're making that decision. Okay? So this is the end of your work and achievement motivation video notes for Unit 8. If you have any questions, obviously let me know, but hopefully with some of the in-class activities that we're going to give to you, you'll be able to kind of figure this out for yourself and feel pretty confident moving into things on the unit test.